The rain hammered against the cracked window of the small diner as Sarah wiped down the same table for the third time, her calloused hands trembling not from the cold, but from exhaustion that ran bone deep. At 28, she carried the weight of the world in her tired eyes that had seen too many unpaid bills, too many sleepless nights wondering how she'd feed her 6-year-old daughter Emma tomorrow. The morning rush had been slower than usual, and with only $12 in tips, she was doing the math in her head. Rent was due in 3 days, Emma needed new shoes, and the electricity bill sat unopened on her kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. Marcus Chen had everything money could buy, yet as he sat in his penthouse office overlooking the Seattle skyline, he felt emptier than the homeless man he'd stepped over that morning. The 42-year-old tech mogul had built an empire worth $8 billion, but recent betrayals by those closest to him had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about human nature. His ex-fiancée copyrightee had sold their private moments to tabloids for a 7-figure payday. His best friend since college had embezzled millions from their joint venture. His own brother had attempted a hostile takeover of his company. The world saw Marcus Chen as a visionary, a philanthropist, a success story, but behind closed doors, he was a man who had forgotten what genuine human connection felt like. The idea came to him during a board meeting when his assistant mentioned the company's upcoming community outreach program. What if he could test whether real kindness still existed in a world that seemed driven purely by greed? What if he could find someone who would show compassion to a stranger with nothing to offer in return? The plan was simple yet elaborate. He would disguise himself as a down-on-his-luck man and see how ordinary people treated him when they believed he had nothing to give. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood outside Rosie's diner in the Rainier Valley neighborhood, barely recognizable even to himself. Gone were the tailored suits and Swiss watches, replaced by threadbare clothes from a thrift store, scuffed shoes with holes, and a baseball cap pulled low over his unwashed hair. He had practiced his story, recently laid off from a factory job, living in his car, looking for work, and had even learned to speak with a slight accent to disguise his voice. His private investigator had done the research. This diner was struggling, located in a working-class neighborhood where people understood hardship intimately. The bell above the door chimed as Marcus entered, and he immediately noticed how the other customers subtly shifted away from him. Their eyes registered his appearance: the torn jacket, the worn shoes, the defeat he had carefully crafted into his posture, and their reactions ranged from indifference to disgust. He shuffled to a corner booth, hyper-aware of how people perceived him when they thought he was society's forgotten. Sarah approached his table with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was smaller than he had expected, with brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and a uniform that had seen better days. But when she looked at him, something shifted in her expression. Instead of the judgment he had grown accustomed to that morning, he saw something else: a recognition of shared struggle. "What can I get you, huh?" she asked, her voice warm despite the obvious exhaustion. Marcus cleared his throat, slipping into character. Just coffee, please." "Black." Sarah nodded and returned with a steaming mug. As she set it down, she noticed his hands shaking slightly, a detail Marcus had added to his performance, but one that clearly resonated with her. "You okay, sweetie? You look like you could use something to eat." "I'm fine," Marcus replied, perhaps too quickly. "Just the coffee." But Sarah lingered, and Marcus saw her glance toward the kitchen, then back at him. Without a word, she disappeared and returned 5 minutes later with a plate of eggs, bacon, toast, and hash browns. "On the house," she said quietly, setting it down before he could protest. Marcus stared at the plate, genuinely stunned. I can't pay for this." "I didn't ask you to," Sarah replied with a shrug. Everyone deserves a hot meal. As Marcus ate, he watched Sarah work. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, but he noticed the small kindness: how she slipped extra crackers to an elderly man who ordered only soup, how she let a young mother with crying twins sit longer than necessary without pressuring them to order more, how she checked on a construction worker who had been nursing the same cup of coffee for an hour, clearly making it last. What struck Marcus most was that Sarah seemed to be struggling herself. Her uniform was faded and carefully mended, her shoes worn thin, and he overheard her quietly asking her manager about picking up extra shifts. Yet here she was, giving away food she probably couldn't afford to spare. Over the next week, Marcus returned to the diner daily, maintaining his disguise and gradually learning more about Sarah's life. She was a single mother whose ex-husband had left when their daughter was 2, leaving behind only debt and heartbreak. She worked double shifts when she could get them, attending community college online in the evenings, determined to build a better life for Emma. Despite her circumstances, she consistently showed kindness to those she perceived as worse off than herself. On his 7th visit, Marcus witnessed something that would stay with him forever. An elderly veteran came in, clearly homeless and disoriented. Other customers whispered complaints, and the manager started to approach the man with obvious intent to ask him to leave. But Sarah intercepted, gently guiding the veteran to a quiet corner booth. "Hey there, Mr. Frank," she said, apparently recognizing him. The usual. She brought him a full meal and sat with him for a few minutes, listening as he spoke about his late wife, about his struggles with the VA, about how alone he felt. Marcus watched, mesmerized, as Sarah treated this forgotten man with the same dignity she would show anyone else. When Mr. Frank finished eating, Sarah quietly slipped him a $20 bill of money. Marcus realized she desperately needed herself. That evening, Marcus followed Sarah at a distance as she left work. He watched her stop at a small apartment building, climb 3 flights of stairs, and enter a modest unit where warm light spilled from the windows. Through the thin walls, he could hear Sarah playing with her daughter, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. Despite everything she was going through, she was creating a home filled with love. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the diner to find Sarah in tears, trying to hide her distress as she served customers. During a brief break, he overheard her on the phone. "Please, I just need another week. My daughter. She needs her medication, and if you shut off the power, I promise I'll have your money by Friday." Something inside Marcus broke. He had spent weeks testing whether genuine goodness existed in the world, and he had found it in this woman who gave everything she had to others despite having so little herself. The experiment was over. That afternoon, Marcus returned to his penthouse and made a series of phone calls that would change everything. By evening, he had purchased the building where Sarah lived, anonymously paid all her outstanding debts, and arranged for a college scholarship fund in Emma's name. But he wasn't finished. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work to find the diner buzzing with unusual activity. Strange men in suits were talking to her manager, and customers were whispering about some kind of business deal. When she asked what was happening, her manager could only shake his head in bewilderment. Marcus walked in during the lunch rush, but this time he looked like himself, a clean, well-dressed, unmistakably successful. Sarah didn't recognize him initially. After all, she had only known him as a struggling man in worn clothes. He requested to sit in her section, and as she approached his table, something in his eyes made her pause. "What can I get you?" she asked, professional despite her confusion. "Just coffee." "Black," Marcus replied, and Sarah's hand froze halfway to her notepad. The voice was the same, the inflection, the slight pause before speaking. It was him. But how could the homeless man she had been feeding all week be sitting here in an expensive suit? "I don't understand," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle. "My name is Marcus Chen. For the past week, I've been coming here pretending to be someone I'm not. I was testing something, trying to find out if genuine kindness still exists in this world." Sarah's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, realization, then something that looked like hurt. "You were testing me?" "I was testing everyone," Marcus said quickly. "But Sarah, what I found in you wasn't just kindness, it was grace under pressure, generosity when you had nothing to spare, dignity when the world had given you every reason to be bitter. You passed a test you didn't even know you were taking." Sarah sat down heavily in the booth across from him, her uniform crinkling. "I don't understand why someone would do that, why someone would lie about being poor when there are people who really need." "Because I had forgotten," Marcus interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "I had forgotten that people like you exist. In my world, everyone wants something from me, everyone has an angle, a scheme, a way to benefit from my wealth. I started to believe that genuine human kindness was extinct, that everyone was just waiting for their chance to take advantage. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "Sarah, I want to offer you something, not as charity, not as payment for your kindness, but as an investment in the kind of person the world needs more of." Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents showing that her rent had been paid for the next 2 years, her student loans had been cleared, and a college fund had been established for Emma that would cover her education through graduate school. There was also a job for Director of Community Outreach for Chen Industries, with a salary that would allow her to provide for Emma while still helping others. "I can't accept this," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's too much. I didn't do anything special. I just treated you like a human being." "That's exactly why you deserve it," Marcus replied. "Sarah, in a world where people constantly disappoint me, you showed me what real character looks like. You gave food to someone you thought couldn't pay for it. You showed respect to people others ignored. You worked multiple jobs and still found time to be an amazing mother. You're not poor in any way that matters." The diner had grown quiet around them, other customers and staff sensing something important was happening. Sarah looked around at the place where she had struggled and served, where she had shown kindness to strangers and saved every dollar she could. "There's one condition," Marcus continued. "I want you to help me learn how to be the kind of person you are naturally. I want to remember what it feels like to help people without expecting anything in return. I want to use my resources the way you would if you had them." Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at this billionaire who had disguised himself as a homeless man just to understand human nature. "You don't need to learn how to be kind, Marcus. You already know. You just forgot that it was worth the risk." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same diner, but everything had changed. Sarah had accepted his offer and had transformed Chen Industries' approach to community investment. Instead of writing checks to established charities, they now focused on individuals like herself, people who needed a hand up, not a handout. The diner had become one of their community centers, offering job training, childcare, and hot meals to anyone who needed them. Sarah had kept her shifts 1 day a week, insisting that she never wanted to lose touch with the community that had shaped her. Emma thrived in her new school, but more importantly, she was learning the same values her mother had always embodied, that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Marcus had learned something invaluable during his week as a homeless man, that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they give when they have nothing left to spare. In testing Sarah's character, he had discovered his own capacity for genuine human connection. As he watched Sarah serve coffee to Mr. Frank, who now had stable housing and medical care thanks to their programs, Marcus realized that the greatest fortune wasn't in his bank account, it was in the reminder that in a world that often seems cruel and indifferent, there are still people who choose kindness as their default response to human suffering. The test was over, but the real work had just begun.